There are so many players in world football that are going to go on to be underappreciated until we don't have them around anymore. And I'm not talking about players that we consider to be world class already. For example, Pedri and Jude, right? People hate them or love them, but generally we know what they are capable of and they are usually celebrated very openly. I'm more so talking about what in the past might be considered a streets won't forget type of player, but I for one think some of these guys deserve their flowers now while we still can appreciate them and watch them on the pitch. And Scott McTominay is going to be one of those guys who we don't know how much we appreciate until he's gone. And you might be thinking to yourself, what the hell is this guy talking about, trying to feed us some Scott McTominay propaganda in big 2025 near big 2026? Well, I'm gonna need you to strap yourself in because over these last couple of seasons, McTominay's been carving out a nice little career for himself. And look, I don't want to confuse anyone on the intent of this video. By no stretch of the imagination am I currently saying that Scott McTominay has turned into the best midfielder in the world or that by the end of the season he's going to be regarded as such. However, in a footballing landscape where conversations about players can become too much of an annoyance because people only ever want to talk about either their favorite player or only top 5 in a position, players like Scott McTominay continue to get buried, and as a result, campaigns and moments that he has had over the last few years, which we should be celebrating more, get really just disregarded. And again, we'll look back at it in a couple of years and say, wow, remember those 2, 3, 4 years where Scott McTominay was just on fire? Let's talk about it now while it's still here. So all that to say, I am about to glaze Scott McTominay a little bit because we need to appreciate some good old-fashioned hoops while we're watching it live. The thing is, when it comes to talking about Scott McTominay, is that his public perception is always going to be down in the dumps because of pretty much his time with United. At Manchester United, McTominay broke onto the scene under Jose Mourinho as what felt like a solid defensive midfielder who could play the destroyer role. He wasn't the second coming of Patrick Vieira when he first came along, but there was an underlying notion that he could just get the job done when called upon. But as many of us know, things haven't been well and dandy at United since Mourinho's time there. As many others beside him, McTominay would go through a carousel of a few different managers, which of course would impact his development, and come the end of his time with the club, many felt that he was just much more of a liability, especially when high stakes were on the line. Interestingly enough though, it would be Scott McTominay's final season with United that actually started to turn some heads towards him. In that final season, playing primarily as a defensive midfielder in a double pivot under Ten Hag, the 23-24 season, which was abysmal for the club, would be a decent one for McTominay as he would come up with 10 goals and 3 assists in 43 games. Mind you, more often than not, he was coming off the bench in those 43 games, so that was all just what he was doing as an impact sub. He wasn't even playing every single minute available. And notably this season, he'd get 2 goals off the bench in stoppage time in a 2-1 win over Brentford, 2 goals in a 2-1 win over Chelsea, game winner against Aston Villa off the bench, and the opener and equalizing assist in a 4-3 win over Liverpool in the FA Cup. So even though this guy wasn't lighting the world on fire for this terrible United side, he still managed to play an important role thanks in large part to his ability to crash the box at what felt like a pretty elite level from the midfield, which would help him turn up with those important goals. Aside from this, he was still doing the bare minimum general tasks of being a destroyer at that center defensive midfielder position. And mind you, that season in the Premier League specifically, he had 7 goals, which was more than guys like Martinelli, Bernardo Silva, Evan Ferguson, Morgan Gibbs-White, John McGinn, Mudryk, and so many others. So come the end of the season, it was all but confirmed that Scott McTominay would be leaving the club, which of course begged the question of where was he gonna go next. Surely someone with the talents of Scott McTominay would end up at a club worse than United, or maybe some random European club that maybe isn't too relevant. But little did Scott McTominay know that a certain Italian club was keeping an eye on him and was about to change his life forever. After making just 3 appearances for United on August 30th, 2024, Scott McTominay would sign for Napoli for about 25 million euros. Gli Azzurri was coming off a very difficult 23-24 campaign where they would finish in 10th place and cycle through 3 different managers with all of them doing terribly. Arguably one of the only other top clubs to have a worse season than United that year. And considering that the season before that they had won their first Scudetto since 1990, the club needed to get back on track ASAP to ensure that another drought like this wouldn't happen again. So with that, the first order of business would be to bring in Antonio Conte. The manager that is known to be a serial winner, especially in Italy, was considered perfect for this job. And to go along with his arrival, the club would bring in players like Romelu Lukaku, David Neres, Alessandro Buongiorno, Spinazzola, and the Scottish pairing of Billy Gilmore and Scott McTominay. So in the blink of an eye, Scott McTominay went from being one of the perennial scapegoats at United, playing under a very tactically inept manager, to being a part of a project that had a clear vision, a clear style of play, and a club that actively wanted him to play for them. So going into the season, the assumption was that Conte was going to keep using McTominay in that kind of center defensive midfielder role, especially considering previous Conte setups and kind of the profile that McTominay had built for himself. But Conte was playing 4D chess and managed to actually play McTominay in positions that suited him best, slightly more forward than usual. individual. See, McTominay for whatever reason has a knack for scoring goals, and his ability to crash the box is honestly a whole lot better than his ability to win the ball in the midfield. So in the span of the first few games, Conte would experiment with playing McTominay as either an attacking midfielder or as a center mid with a little bit more freedom to roam forward. Subsequently, McTominay would get 2 goals and 2 assists in his first 7 matches, which all resulted in wins for Napoli. From here, not only was it clear that McTominay was going to thrive a whole lot more in this new role for him, but also that Napoli was going to reap the benefits of what McTominay was able to do at that higher role. So pretty much for the rest of the season, McTominay and Napoli would continue to cook. It didn't matter that the table was tight the entire year. McTominay was hooping like he had never before. He would finish the season with 13 goals and 6 assists in 36 games across all competitions as a midfielder. He would get a goal against Inter in a 1-1 draw. He would get what was at the moment a go-ahead goal against Atalanta in a 3-2 win, a goal against Torino in a 1-0 win, an assist against Lecce in a 1-0 win, goal against Udinese in a 1-1 draw, a goal against Monza in a 1-0 win, 2 goals against Torino again in a 2-0 win, and 2 assists in a 2-2 draw against Genoa. So now pair all of these key performances with the fact that he averaged a 7.27 rating, the fact that he ran that left side of the midfield for Napoli, the fact that he ranked incredibly highly in so many attacking metrics in comparison to other midfielders. This all helped McTominay capture the Serie A League MVP and also helped Napoli secure their second Scudetto in 3 years. In just one season, McTominay became such a loved figure at Naples and literally became the best player in Serie A. And I just can't help but feel like we're not talking about this guy enough. Again, I'm not saying that he's the best midfielder in the world. He's gonna dethrone all these other guys that we talk about on a weekly basis, but we might not give this guy his flowers now. And mind you, he has started off this season very well again. So far for Napoli in 16 games, he has already had 5 goals and 2 assists. If he keeps this up, he's probably going to be on track to beat his ratio from last season. And you know what? The praise doesn't stop for McTominay there, because aside from his club teams, he's also been putting a lot of work into his national team to get them firing. He's helped Scotland make some waves in international football as they have qualified for their first World Cup since 1999 this past window. And such a big factor in Scotland getting that qualification was McTominay being such a big figure, a big leader, and just a big presence going forward in that side. He got 2 vital goals and an assist in qualifiers that helped this nation make a statement on the final day as they punched their ticket. He's finally really kind of cashing in on that nickname Sir McSauce. Who knows how long Scott's sanity is gonna last. There's a chance that after this season he kind of just withers away. Sometimes that happens when these random players just start to have generational runs in a season or two, but given the fact that he's in a good environment, I think as long as Conte is there, he's probably going to continue to thrive. Considering how long players last in Serie A specifically, he's on the younger end of that scale. I love to see it. Like I said, we got to give praise to these players while we still got them.